Hi, everyone. Welcome to FRAC's deep dive webinar on the findings of our new report, After School Suppers, a Snapshot of Participation, October 2023. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 45 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Kelsey Boone, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC. Take it away, Kelsey.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. As Steve said, I'm Kelsey Boone, and I'm here to present the findings of our new after-school report. Next slide. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, and we will start with a look at food insecurity and after-school meals before going into report methodology and findings before turning to recommendations in the after-school space. I will touch on some of our resources before handing it off to our wonderful partner, Alexis, from the Afterschool Alliance to talk through some of their research and recommendations for after-school programming. Finally, we'll wrap up with a brief Q&A session. Next slide. So in order to understand why after-school meals are so important, we need to understand what food insecurity is. Food insecurity occurs when individuals do not have access to enough food or food of adequate quality to meet their needs. There are two levels of food insecurity: low food insecurity, which means that households report reduced quality or desirability of the foods that they eat, and very low food security, where a household reports lessening food intake or changing their eating patterns. Next slide. Childhood food insecurity can have multiple impacts on children physically, mentally, and academically. Children can experience delayed development or an increased risk of chronic illness, low energy, or other mental health issues such as anxiety or depression, as well as memory and behavioral issues. Next slide. Recently, the most up-to-date food insecurity data was released by USDA. Since 2022, we have seen a massive jump in food insecurity. In 2023, 17.9% of families with children reported experiencing one of the types of food insecurity. That is 1 in 6 families. Next slide. So how do after-school meals help? First, they help to combat hunger by providing free meals and/or snacks to children in low-income communities. These meals also support the overall operations of schools or other sponsors running the program by providing reimbursements that can help boost their budgets. The program is also flexible, meaning that it is easier for sponsors to fit it in around already existing programming. And finally, these meals ensure children have the nutrition they need to stay engaged in after-school programming. Next slide. So let's dig into our report. To create this report, we initially request October 2023 data from USDA that includes the total number of suppers and snacks served through the at-risk Child and Adult Care Food Program. I will be referring to this as CACFP throughout the rest of the presentation, and the total number of snacks served at the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, sites. To calculate average daily participation, we back out the number of operating days for each state and divide the number of meals served by that number for each state. FRAC's participation goal is based on previous conversations and studies into after-school meals. This goal of 15 children receiving an after-school supper per 100 receiving a free or reduced price school lunch is an achievable goal for each state. We also calculate the reimbursement dollars each state misses out on by not reaching our 15 to 100 goal. Next slide. So some key findings. Through our data analysis, we found that 1.23 million children received an after-school supper on an average school day in October 2023. 1.25 million children received an after-school snack, an increase of 63,112 children from October 2022. Additionally, participation in after-school suppers increased by 73,878 children, or 6.4%, in October 2023 when compared to October 2022. Next slide. The after-school supper program served 1.23 million children on an average weekday in October 2023, an increase of 73,878 children, as I said, or 6.4% from October 2022. Participation in after-school suppers remained low when compared to pre-pandemic levels, serving 193,731 less children in October 2023 than at October 2019. The bar charts of these numbers can be seen on the slide in front of you. Next slide. We also look at the percentage of overall after-school average daily participation coming from each program to see how much opportunity there is to move from snacks to suppers, which provide a higher reimbursement and better address the nutritional needs of children participating in the program. This year, 49.5% of the overall after-school participation was in CACFP at-risk suppers and 12.4% in CACFP at-risk snacks, meaning that the 38.1% in NSLP snacks allow for this opportunity. Next slide. This slide shows a list of states that where over 50% of their total after-school participation was in NSLP snacks, and provides the most opportunity to move to CACFP suppers and provide a higher reimbursement. Next slide. As far as sites, in both CACFP and NSLP, there were increases over numbers from 2022 and have almost recovered to pre-pandemic levels. For CACFP at risk, 26,969 sites, an increase of 5,062 sites over 2022, participated in October 2023. For NSLP, 19,339 sites, an increase of 3,013 sites from 2022, participated in October 2023. And as I mentioned, those numbers are almost back up to pre-pandemic levels. Next slide. Only 2 states met the FRAC goal of reaching 15 children receiving an after-school supper per 100 receiving a free or reduced price school lunch. They were California and Washington, D.C. 7 additional states reached more children with after-school suppers than the national average of 6.2 to 100. They were Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Missouri, Nevada, Oklahoma, and Texas. There were 33 states that served supper to fewer than 1 child for every 20 children from households with low incomes who participated in school lunch. 3 of those states served fewer than 1 out of 100. Next slide. So what happened in 2023? Participation growth in the supper program began to plateau in 2019, with many eligible sites still not participating. The pandemic waiver flexibilities from spring 2020 through the 2021-2022 school year allowed the pre-pandemic level of participation to be maintained and even slightly increase, reaching an all-time high of 1.49 million children in October 2021. October 2022 marked the first year that participation in after-school suppers decreased since the program became available nationwide in 2010. Due to the end of the pandemic waivers and the operational challenges after-school programs were experiencing. The slight increases in October 2023 indicate that while after-school programs are beginning to recover from the pandemic, the end of the waiver flexibilities and continuing pre-pandemic challenges continue to affect overall participation. The influx of federal funding that has been available throughout the pandemic through September 30th, 2024 for after-school programs may be helping supper participation bounce back. Next slide. So we're going to look at some opportunities in the program. Next slide. So first, we'll start with policy recommendations that FRAC has put forth in response to the findings of this report. The first is to streamline the after-school and summer nutrition programs. This means that we are hoping to have sponsors run the after-school meal program under the summer food service program as opposed to CACFP, as most sponsors already run the summer food service program, and this could reduce administrative burden on schools and sponsors. The next is to allow school food authorities to serve suppers through the National School Lunch Program. Schools are limited to providing snacks after school under NSLP. To offer a full meal instead of just a snack, or to serve children on the weekends or school holidays, schools have to operate CACFP, which often results in schools only providing snacks through NSLP. To address this issue, any future CNR child nutrition reauthorization should allow schools to provide up to a meal and a snack any day during the regular school year through NSLP. The next is to lower the area eligibility threshold. Currently, for CACFP at risk, a site must be in an area where at least 50% of children are eligible for free or reduced price school meals. This threshold excludes many communities with less concentrated poverty, such as rural and suburban areas. Lowering the eligibility threshold to 40% would enhance access to suppers across all states and align site eligibility with the 40% threshold used for 21st century community learning center programs and Title I schools. Another recommendation is to permanently increase funding for the after-school programs. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 significantly increased the federal investment for after-school and summer programs, allocating $30 billion. However, these funds had to be obligated by September 30th, 2024. Even with the additional American Rescue Plan funding, it has been found that millions of children are not enrolled in after-school programs, but would participate if these programs were available. With the demand for after-school programming already outpacing supply, the end of the American Rescue Plan funding could worsen this issue. In response, it's crucial to prioritize and maintain federal funding for after-school programs. And our final policy recommendation is mandate participation for area eligible sites. Many states have advanced efforts to mandate participation in the school breakfast program and summer food service program to ensure that schools in low-income areas provide meals to eligible children. This trend is gaining traction in after-school nutrition as well, with Virginia and Maine leading the way by passing legislation that requires schools running after-school programs to participate. Next slide. So on the programmatic side, we have a few recommendations as well. The first is to retain, recruit, and support districts running the programs. So school nutrition departments are well equipped and experienced in running federal child nutrition programs effectively. To increase participation among school nutrition departments, state agencies and advocates can reach out to eligible schools, identify obstacles to participation or continued participation, and help schools address these challenges. Another is to serve suppers instead of, or in addition to, snacks. One of the most straightforward ways to combat student hunger and enhance nutrition is for after-school programs to offer supper. If the program runs long enough, it can provide both supper and a snack. Additionally, but not including supper, sponsors and sites forfeit the opportunity for significantly higher federal reimbursements, which could make the after-school nutrition programs more financially sustainable. The next is to improve meal quality and appeal. So all suppers and snacks provided through the after-school nutrition programs must adhere to federal nutrition standards. We at FRAC have a few resources that can help sponsors look at the quality of meals, and those will be linked in one of our links on our resource page. And they are the FRAC's After-School Standards of Excellence and some information on farm to after-school initiatives. The next is to reduce barriers. Long travel distances can make it difficult for some children to stay after school, even if programs are available. To address this issue, schools can adjust bus schedules to accommodate meal service and enrichment activities before buses depart, And additionally, schools can consider combining meals in the classroom with homework help after the bell rings and delay the time the school buses depart. Next slide. So here are some of our resources. The first is the link to our Afterschool Nutrition Report, and the second is a link to all of our after-school nutrition resources. That page will include the resources that I mentioned previously, as well as others. And now I will hand it off to Alexis from the Afterschool Alliance.
Thanks, Kelsey. And it's great to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Alexis Steinis-Rao, and I am with the Afterschool Alliance. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we're a national advocacy organization, much like FRAC, based in Washington, D.C., that works nationwide to ensure that all children and youth have access to affordable, high-quality after-school and summer learning programs. Nationally, we work with many organizations and partners. We also work with over 25,000 program providers. We're not a membership organization. Our resources are completely free of charge. To say that we work with you, sign up for our email list. Additionally, we work with the 50 statewide after-school networks, which I'll get into a little bit later in this presentation, 200 after-school ambassadors who are program leaders at the local level who talk about the wonderful work that they are doing in their after-school programs. And likewise, we have vistas that are embedded throughout statewide after-school networks, working to help build state and local infrastructure to help support various aspects of after-school programming, including access to after-school and summer meals. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do today is, you've heard from Kelsey about the meal side of things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about initiatives to boost after-school programs. So focusing a bit on the need and demand for after-school and talking a bit about why it's important to invest in these programs. Additionally, we'll talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan funding cliff. There's been a tremendous investment over the last couple of years in after-school and summer learning programs, but those dollars from the federal government are going away very soon. Additionally, we'll talk about current efforts to increase access to quality after-school programming through some state and federal initiatives that are happening, and then ways that you can help advocate to make sure that children and youth have access to these incredibly important programs. So next slide, please. So this data that I'm going to share comes from our 2020 America After 3 p.m. survey, which is a report that we put out every 5 years. It's a household survey. We'll actually be heading into the field early next year for our next iteration of this, where we try to take the pulse of how do Americans, and in particular parents, feel about after school and summer programs. The data for our 2020 report is actually pre-pandemic, so keep that in mind as you hear the numbers here. But when we did this, we found that nearly 25 million children would enroll in an after-school program if one were available. And that marks the highest demand in the history that we've been doing the America After 3 p.m. survey, which dates back to 2004. So we've been doing this for a couple of decades at this point. The demand for unmet programs has grown 60% since 2004. So there's clearly a need for high quality after school programs for families to have access to. Next slide, please. So why invest in after school? And I apologize. These are a lot of great information here, though, very small print. Well, we have surveys that find that after school programs are delivering activities and supports that young people want in their after school. It's a safe and welcoming environment. Youth find opportunities to talk with peers or staff about their feelings and emotions. It's a place where they can feel heard, and it's a place where they're safe. They're supportive adults and peers, and they have time to interact with those peers and build social skills. It's a balance of learning, fun, and a variety of engaging activities. There's academic achievement opportunities, there's opportunities to participate in sports and other physical activity, to be able to get out into nature and outside and just enjoy outdoor activities, as well as opportunities to explore STEM, the world of STEM education as well. There's many things that keep youth excited and engaged because they're able to take those lessons that they're learning during the regular school day and apply it hands-on in their after-school space. Additionally, there's tangible resources. So there's wraparound services connecting youth to youth and their families to health or dental clinics, financial planning, mental health, access to technology, and perhaps most importantly, access to snacks and meals that they may not receive otherwise, or that they're able to then access in their after school program. Likewise, after school and summer learning programs are helping youth prepare for their futures. They're developing life skills, they're having leadership opportunities, they're having access to college and career advising or post secondary transition coaching. So there's a lot of resources that after school provides, and there's a key reason why we should be investing in it. Next slide. So again, this just further reiterates that after school programs are supporting student success. I mean, parents are finding that, after school helps with homework assistance. They offer opportunities for reading or writing. They offer opportunities for learning and applying those skills that they're learning in the regular school day and really bringing it to life for you through those hands-on and engaging activities after school. Likewise, they're helping to close the achievement gap. So consistent participation in a high quality after school program can help eliminate that achievement gap, especially for our lower income youth, where they have opportunities to really be able to engage, and higher participation tends to equal higher achievement. Next slide, please. After school also does a tremendous job of helping families and communities. So there's a couple of studies out of Brandeis University that really look to try and understand how parents find after school and how it helps them deal with the stress that they may have about where their children are and what they're doing after 3 p.m. One study found that parents with high levels of parental after school stress miss 8 unscheduled days of work per year, compared to 3 days for those with lower stress levels. And a second study found that the cost of parental stress to employers costs employers $50 to $300 billion. We know through our own research and our own surveys that a significant number of parents agree that after school programs help give them peace of mind because they know where their children are at work. They're not somewhere where they could potentially be in danger or where there's problems. They're in a caring space with caring adults where they're being able to engage in those exciting activities. So that this is an economic benefit as well as a stress relief for many parents. Next slide, please. So this here looks a little bit at the funding that came through the American Rescue Plan and where the funding cliff exists. So here you see a timeline from 2020 of the money that has been invested into after school and summer learning programs. So in 2019, $3 billion in federal funding was invested. And then in 2020, COVID relief dollars created this historic opportunity to expand federal investments, specifically through ESSER 3 funding. But as you can see, while these dollars are significant, there is a timeline to them. ESSER 3 funds had to have been obligated by the end of last month, so September 30th, although some school districts did take the option to request a waiver that allows them to extend that spending deadline for up to 14 months. ESSER 3 dollars must be spent no later than January 30th, 2025, unless the school district took that waiver. And by 2026, all state and local fiscal recovery funds need to be spent by the end of that calendar year. What this translates to is that there's going to be a $10.2 billion shortfall, and that the sustainability of these after-school programs that have been able to come into existence because of the ESSER dollars and the American Rescue Plan dollars, the sustainability of those programs will depend on a mix of federal, state, and local funds. And I can give you some insights into some of the efforts that we're seeing happen across the country to support that. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to do now is look a little bit at what some of those efforts look like. We've seen some significant increases in state level funding over the last couple of years to be able to help support after school and summer program. So next slide, please. So in the year 2000, there was an investment of $264 million from 15 states in after school. In 2024, that has increased to $5 billion from 26 states. State funding is nearly 20 times greater today than it was in 2020. And states are using these dollars to address key issues. They're focusing on academic recovery and gains. After schools helping address issues of chronic absenteeism. They're playing into opportunities to expose youth to career exploration and workforce development. They're helping working families and economic development in general. They're also providing kids with a safe and healthy space and also supporting youth mental well-being. States like Georgia used COVID funding to create what they're calling the Boost Grants, which have provided some tremendous outcomes by helping to make really strong investments in after-school programs in those states. And the growth in state level funding for after-school programs really does reflect that increased demand by parents and young people for after school as well. And we have a number of resources on our website that talk about how states are funding additional after school and summer programs and can help provide a blueprint for how other states may be able to follow. Next slide, please. And this slide here just shows you the states that currently do have some kind of funding stream, and where you see the stars, those are new state funding to help sustain the pandemic relief funding. Like I said, there's this new cohort of states. There's 26 states, 7 in the past 2 years, bringing it to $5 billion. And most of these have been funded through budget line items. New York recently combined 2 separate funding streams, one through the state education department and one through the state child care agency, now over $100 million. Illinois has multiple funding streams, including the Team Reach program, focusing on youth violence prevention, and new funding passed to complement their 21st century funds. California in the early 2000s passed the Prop 49 ballot initiative, which is state funding for after school. And then in the 2021 to 2022 legislative session, partly with ARP and now all state funds, started the expanded learning opportunity program for schools to fund after school, often in partnership with community-based providers. And then Colorado has had youth service funding for many years and has now just passed new funding through bipartisan legislation that also helps to support those community-based after-school programs. Next slide, please. And this slide here shows a couple of additional states that have established some really strong state funding streams: Alabama, Michigan, Tennessee, Vermont, all focused on a variety of things, but all with the primary goal of continuing to provide additional support for after-school programs to ensure that all children and youth in those states do have access to something high quality in their community. Next slide, please. So there's, as I said, in addition to the state funding, it's going to be a combination with federal and local dollars to help support the sustainability. And I'll touch on a couple of federal funding streams that are also helping to support after school. Next slide, please. So the primary federal funding stream for after school and summer learning programs is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. The public investment in 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which has largely stalled and not kept up with the cost of inflation, which has increased 30% over the past decade. So after adjusting for inflation, the current funding level is approximately $167 million below the 2014 level. So we need to be advocating for increased investment, for Congress to make increased investment in the 21st Century Community Learning Centers programs, because this is a key source of funding to help support these programs, particularly in those communities that are serving lower income youth. Next slide, please. On the other hand, there's been a significant investment in School Age Care and Child Development Fund, CCDBG. It has broad bipartisan popularity and support from both sides of the aisle, as well as from businesses. The funds have received significant increases since the authorization of the law in 2014. And you can see on the chart here how that has gone up. We now have a funding stream that's over $12 billion annually, which also means that states have about $1 billion to spend flexibly on quality initiatives to support the field each year. That does not include the 3% specific infant and toddler set aside. So there is money through CCDBG to help support school-aged after-school programming. Next slide, please. Additionally, there's a couple of bills that are working their way through Congress that could potentially help support after school. One is the Youth Workforce Readiness Act, which is a bipartisan and bicameral bill that would potentially establish a competitive grant through the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration for eligible national youth serving out of school time organizations providing youth force readiness programs for youth between the ages of 6 to 18. And next slide, please. And then there's the After School Act, which would establish a new $100 million non-competitive grant program through the Department of Justice to help schools establish, maintain, and strengthen after-school programs. So there's a couple of different opportunities that Congress is looking at. Next slide, please. So what we do know is that 8 in 10 voters want more funding for after school, and that this is an issue that is broadly bipartisan. We found that research spanning several states shows that for every dollar that's invested in after school, programs save at least $3 by increasing kids' earning potential as adults, improving kids' performance at school, and reducing crime and juvenile delinquency. And support for after-school funding is at an all-time high with voters across political affiliations, community types, racial and ethnic groups, and age groups in agreement that elected officials should invest more resources in these programs. So next slide, please. And this slide here just gives you that image of there is broad bipartisan support that we're seeing for these programs. And then on the next slide, finally, I just want to take a moment to talk about the 50-state after-school network. Each state has a network that essentially functions quite similarly to the Afterschool Alliance. Instead of the work that we're doing at the national level, the state networks provide support at the local level. They're doing state-level advocacy. They're focusing on training and technical assistance, and they're there to be a resource and a help to link after-school programs to help be able to build relationships with community-based organizations and other groups. If you are not in touch with your 50-state network, if you're not in touch with the network in your state, you absolutely should be, and it can access it through this website here, as well as on the Afterschool Alliance website. But I encourage you to reach out to them to talk to them more about advocacy on both after-school meals as well as on after-school programs in general. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kelsey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Currently, there are no questions in the Q&A function, so if you have questions, please put them in there now. Okay, so the first question just came through, and it is, I'm curious why FRAC's policy recommendation is to streamline after-school and summer nutrition programs is to make SFSP year-round rather than at-risk after-school year-round. So for that, I would say because the infrastructure for SFSP is already well maintained by the sponsors and sites that we have, and a lot of the CACFP administrative burden can sometimes be a little bit higher than that of SFSP. So since these programs are already used to running the SFSP program, our recommendation is to continue that program so that sponsors do not have to then opt into a second program, because a lot of those sponsors are already running that summer program. And yes, the slides will be shared in a week or two. Within a week, we will be sending out a follow-up email with the slides, the recording, as well as contact information. I am going to just give it another minute or two for the questions. So as far as accessing our report, if you just go to FRAC's website, which is www.frac.org, on our drop-down under programs is the after school program, and click on that, and it will take you to our landing site for after school meals, and you can access the report. It is at the top of the page there. Additionally, and Steve just put the URL in the chat. The next question is, can you say more about what you mean by improving the quality of meals, nutritional quality, local, fresher? all of those things are what we mean by improving quality of meals. So obviously we want kids to be excited to eat these meals at the same time that we are are giving them the nutrition that they need. So, you know, the appeal of the meals is really, really key as well. And a lot of that can be done through local foods, fresh foods, and obviously nutritional quality. These foods need to meet the nutrition standards set by USDA. So they are already high nutrition meals, but kind of bringing in some of those more fun foods and local foods can really help by to increase the quality of the meals. And yes, we have resources on that on our website as well. Any more questions? We have some great comments in the chat, and I appreciate those. All right, if there are any lingering questions, feel free to reach out to me at my email, which is on the screen here. Again, these slides will be sent out and you'll have access to that as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up as you're going through the report or through the slides today. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much to Alexis and the Afterschool Alliance for all of your partnership and for being on our presentation today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Halloween.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.